All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Leah. I'm here to introduce Jameson House with our bronze sponsor, Rapid SOS. I'm going to let you take it away.
That was super simple. I love simple introductions. That's
Okay.
so great. Good morning, folks. We were just having a chat before this in the green room about different things and getting introductions for us. We need a 3-page dissertation on your bio. No, no, you don't. Hi, I'm Jameson. I'm a recovering telecommunicator, and I'm excited to be here today. And I appreciate everybody who's here. Please make this an interactive session. I know this is a sponsored session. We might be like, "Oh, it's sponsored." I don't know, but please let's be interactive today if we can. There'll be some interesting data that we're going to share today about high impact, low probability types of events, and I think you'll be pretty amazed at the data behind those and what it really means for your comm center. Now, I will tell you that I miss my days being a telecommunicator. And listening to some of the speakers here already this morning has just kind of been refreshing. And I see all the chats going on in the comments, etc. And just enjoy the time you have in the comm center. You're making an incredible difference for all of humanity. And I want to say how much I honor and appreciate every single one of you that are still in the chair doing the job, no matter how tough it gets. The second thing I would say is you take care of yourself. You take care of yourself. We were talking with Leah earlier about maybe going to the gym, going for walks, whatever it is, mental health issues. Please take care of yourself because you are one of the most valuable resources we have across this country, and we need you. So please take care of yourself. So let's get into the content real quick, and I'll try not to be super heavy throughout this process. But what do we do as a company? This is pretty simple. We enable safety and security for the connected human. What does that mean? That means that anytime that you have a connected device, whether it be your cell phone, your vehicle, your home, your work, the Wi-Fi at your office, whatever it may be, there are multiple ways for us to connect information about you or the citizen during an emergency into the comm center. Now, with the coverage that we have today, I know most of you know who we are, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. We're actually going to delve deep into the data part of this. But just the growth in the last few years has been astronomical. Today, Rapid SOS is already sourcing over 500 million, it's half a billion, IoT devices into comm centers in the US, Canada, Mexico. That's a little scary, right? But the way we do it, of course, is incredibly important as well. But the why really is, we'll get to that at the very end. The why Rapid SOS. Now, we currently work with 15,000 different agencies across the United States, doing about 165 to 185 million incidents per year. And I spend about 20,000 hours every single year training and education for telecommunicators, ECCs, regional developments, whatever it may be, citizen state conferences a lot, talking about how we can better provide a better work environment for our telecommunicators. There are two key takeaways that we attempt to do in every interaction, and that's reduce the stress on the work of the telecommunicator, and of course, shorten times of dispatch. And what we're finding is by reducing the stress on telecommunicator, the shortening time of dispatch is almost a fast follow. It just happens the majority of the time automatically because less stress, we're able to execute better, get those callers the help they need, get the response outbound quicker, and get a more adequate response or appropriate response to that level of incident. Today, though, we're going to talk just about some pretty substantial disaster level events. And we're going to use 3 different actual real world events, share information about those, and work through the process of what it means to us in the comm center, and then what it means to us as a company at Rapid SOS and why we are so focused on really making that workspace better. My background includes being emergency management director for our community here in the county, and just had an amazing experience to be able to say, not only am I in the comm center seeing every call for service that comes in, I'm also available to be on the scene for those incidents that exceed the capabilities of our local response function. And that's what emergency managers do, right? They're there to bring in additional resources from the federal, local, state, whatever it may be, to assist in that incident. So really being able to see that firsthand, but also all the calls for service that come in, because those calls didn't stop during tornadoes. They didn't stop during earthquakes, right? They still come in. We're still being impacted by our citizens. So for our discussion this morning, we're going to lump these into 3 categories of disaster. So a long lead time disaster, a hurricane. Hey, we have a few days that we know it's coming. We know the potential track. we can prepare for that. We can evacuate, or we can shelter in place depending on the severity. Secondly, is flooding issues. Right, if flooding issues typically fast follow for hurricanes, but also flash flooding that can occur. That happens very quickly, but we may know about that incident occurring 2 or 3 days out. Hey, expect 5 to 7 inches of rainfall. A short lead time event would be like tornadoes. We had an EF4 go through our jurisdiction here back almost 2 years ago now, and destroyed about a third of the city that ECC was in a matter of 3 to 4 minutes. And just incredible damage. We lost the fire station, police station, city hall, several churches, bank, multiple homes, but no loss of life because we had a short lead time to tell people it's going to be rough this evening. Here's the tornado warning, whatever we need to do to make sure they are safe so that we can reduce that suffering. Wildfires is a short lead time, right? We think about, hey, we know it's drying out quickly, but as soon as the fire starts, we may have a short lead time to actually be able to evacuate folks in that path or to set up the next fire break to kind of control that fire. And that happens a lot out west. And we're going to spend some time on zero lead time today. Zero lead time are the news catchers, right? They're the ones that's like active assailant. We see too much of that. Hazmat evacuations, and then we're going to talk a little bit about train derailments and what it means for locales. The picture here, all three of these pictures are pictures of incidents I was involved in, which is kind of cool. On the far right-hand side, I was able to be the actual shooter in a training exercise for our local university. And I'll tell you that being the suspect, the perpetrator in that incident, I really understood how long I have as a perpetrator to affect damage before the response arrives, and it was eye opening for me. Honestly, it was a little bit emotional because I had so much time to wander around after the first shots were fired to be able to actually cause more damage before the response could find me. And we're going to talk about how we can assist that. So today, 3 case studies very quickly. Hurricane Ian, one of the costliest hurricanes in U.S. history. A campus active assailant event that took place, I believe, earlier this year in February in the United States, and a train derailment that happened just right after that. So I have a video here I'm going to show very quickly, and it's the projected path of Hurricane Ian prior to it making landfall. And what I would like for you to note is that a day or so before, the cone of where it's going to make landfall shifts just about 2 degrees. It's a pretty minimal shift in the grand scheme of things, but the impacts were crazy. So here we are on Saturday morning, looking at what the landfall looks like. Hey, it may be the Panhandle area. Once it crosses over Cuba, it makes a pretty significant hard right turn. And then about 24 hours beforehand, it really shifts about 40 or 50 miles south of where they anticipated. That 2-degree shift can have astronomical impacts on your local infrastructure. Were you prepared? Hey, we're going to shelter in place because it wasn't going to hit us. Those kind of things make a huge impact. Now, I will show you what this looks like from scale going across Florida. So, I'm not going to show you that video because I can't share it to you. I've got a better one. Hang on. Look at here. So this is Cape Coral and Fort Myers, and so this is call volume where it made traditional landfall, the eye wall. And I want you to notice the call volume spikes here as the rain began to fall. Keep in mind, the majority of people were evacuated. So the population coverage actually here was actually much lower than what we'd anticipated to see during one of these events. During this incident, to where you see this massive explosion of call volume, that's terrifying for telecommunicators. And I'll tell you why, because during this time frame, there is no response, right? The severity of the incident is such that we do not send responders into that dangerous environment, and we're waiting for it to subside so we can generate a response. This is heartbreaking for us. We saw this during Hurricane Katrina, right? Where we just could not make an informed decision on response. It was too dangerous, or we couldn't get to the person, whatever it may be. And this is the stress that we as telecommunicators carry our entire life, not our career. We carried our entire life. So what are some ways that we can do to help alleviate some of that for our telecommunicators in these incidents? Now, $5.3 billion in Lee County. That's from where I live. I don't think there's enough here where I live in Tennessee to equate to $5.3 billion. I'm just going to be honest with you. But the impacts on this economy are incredible and they're long felt. But it's not just the economy, right? This is also the responders. So these are their homes. These are this is their vehicles, right, that are being flooded. This is their environment where they live and work. This is their grocery store. And so this disaster not only impacts our community, but it impacts us as responders as well. During instances like this, it's not uncommon for us to lose some infrastructure, right? And so this one is we talked about Martin County lost infrastructure, not able to deliver 911 calls, flooding at the central office. And so what we did at Rapid SOS is like, hey, we can set up a tactical account to be able to shunt all the data about those calls over to Collier County. They can process that information, those calls for service, and then drop those into CAD for Martin County so they can actually dispatch those services. Just another way for us to think outside the box. We've talked about interoperability so much. And what I found post 9/11 is when we were emergency management and all this funding came out for interoperable communications. And we spent a lot of money on communication pathways, including radios, towers, repeaters, etc., and not a lot of communication between people. We enabled communications paths, but we didn't actually close the gap and teach people how to communicate one with another. And so what I found is like in those post years, the folks who understand actual interoperable communications when it occurs, it feels like normal operations. And that's what this was like, right? Yep, that's okay. We can take their calls. We can see their calls. We can create a dispatch incident, get it back to them. No big deal. Have a nice day. That's interoperable communications at its best because it means it's not something that's we had to pull off the shelf, figure out how it works, fidget with it, find somebody who understands how to put it together. It happens in the workflows that we are having today. And we learn from this at Rapid SOS. It's like, how do we generate or create solutions that are in the common workflow of the telecommunicator so that when the major events happen, it just feels like a normal workflow to them. This is the call volume for the entire state of Florida during this incident, and there's some key takeaways here I want to note. So first of all, you can see a little bit of spike in call volume. The blue volume is the day of the hurricane. The orange volume is the nominal traffic by day, and you can see the typical pulse rate, as you might call, for nighttime calls, daytime calls, nighttime calls, daytime calls. During landfall day, right, we saw a significant increase. That's expected. And then on day two, a lot more call volume, but notice that it's not a peak, it's spread out. And typically what that means is, hey, we're getting a lot of calls for service, for additional response, or flooded roadways, or people trapped in their homes. People are starting, the infrastructure may be coming back up, and they're able to make calls throughout the entire day. We think about disasters of this magnitude, and maybe we think about staffing. Oh, we're going to be here 24 hours a day for the next week. Honestly, when you look at one of the costliest hurricanes in U.S. history, by the night of day two, their call volumes back. But day four, we're full into the recovery phase by day four. And we think about this from the standpoint, how do we staff up for those potential events where we have a little bit of warning, some lead time for that disaster? How do we staff? Well, heavy, incredibly heavy for the event apex when we actually see the landfall or we know there's going to be a stormy night, the floods reach their peak, the wildfires are expected to grow. We staff heavy for that. But as we start to mitigate back to the normal call volume, how do we start offloading people, right? How do we start getting them back into their regular shift and having them time to actually be able to rest and relax and go check on their own home, their own families? Three key takeaways. 2-degree course correction, course change in any industry can have incredible impacts on response and recovery, particularly if you didn't evacuate. 2, call volumes. And we're talking a lot about call volumes today. It continues above average during daylight recovery hours, but at night it starts returning back to normal because it was just too dangerous for folks to be out. And 3, callers post-incident might be misrouted. Or a better way of saying that, routed to non-adjacent jurisdictions due to ECC evacuation, staffing resources, system failures. We have designed the 911 network for 50 some odd years now to say if I have X population, then I need Y number of access points, trunks, or SIP connections for that jurisdiction. And that's been true across the majority of the population base. Population roughly 50,000 people. I'm probably going to need about 6 trunks, maybe 8 trunks, to be able to service those calls for service. And that standard is called the P.01 standard. You can look it up. It's very nerdy. Things have changed drastically because we think about that standard of call answering and how many trunks we need based upon population, not based upon number of devices. Nowadays, when we have people calling in, they may have 3 or 4 devices sending information through, including the call. And if it reaches my comm center and we are inundated, right, there's a disaster going on, hurricane, etc. We are inundated. They may get a busy. What happens to that call? Well, it's going to default route maybe to an adjoining jurisdiction or overflow route to an adjoining jurisdiction. It may route to 2 or 3 counties away. Maybe they're busy as well. It's going to continue to jump and pop. So how do we control that workflow to ensure that that call doesn't go there and they're like, oh, well, yep, you're in Weekly County, Tennessee. Let me transfer you back. Goes back to Weekly. Weekly's still busy. Then it goes to Henry. Well, no, you're in Weekly County. Hang on. Send it back. Right. So how do we help that process? And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. So let's talk about active assailant. And we had a lot of video around this that we're probably not going to share in this presentation today. I know that Dare to Be Great, we have a lot of conversations around stress management, a lot of things about critical incident stress debriefings, and et cetera, and about your health and welfare throughout your career. There's nobody attending this conference that hasn't been through some critical incidents, right? And so what I would like to focus on is what typically happens during one of these events. And again, we'll talk about from the call volume. The background on this one is February 13th of this year. Unidentified shooter opened fire at the College of Science at Michigan State University. The gunman then later moved on to Michigan State Student Union, where he killed a third person. Police conducted a 3-hour manhunt. The gunman was found off campus around 11:30 and died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I think that's typically called pled guilty on the scene. All 3 people who were killed were students at the university. No motive, no interaction with the campus, etc. These are the 2 locations. And we talk about active assailant with a high level of respect and regard, right? There are very few things you can do to mitigate the call volume that's about to happen for this comm center. But I think if we look at just the call volume and understand the process of what they're going through, there are learnings for us. So I'm going to show you a short video. This information has been obfuscated, so it's not directly tied to people. It's reference to incidents that were occurring and people who are calling for assistance and things that were going on in this jurisdiction. But it starts with the first 2 calls that have already occurred. Oh my goodness, folks, I apologize. Will it play here? Nope, it won't. Let's see if I can get to play for you quick. If not, we'll go back to it. Oh, here we go. I'm going to play it like this for just a moment, then I'll swap back. But notice the call volume that occurs post-incident across the campus. Lockdown's in place currently. We see that information flowing. If I go full screen here. We see that information is flowing. People are fear, uncertainty, and doubt. At this time, there's no active threat. Okay, so if I have an active assailant, we've worked a couple here in our jurisdiction, it's not uncommon for us to immediately request mutual aid from adjoining jurisdictions. Right, that is one of the first things that we start. If it's in a small community particularly, we're going to need county, state highway patrol as well. Maybe it's adjoining jurisdictions from a neighboring county that's next to us to send additional resources. Keep in mind that this is at night. You're calling in additional jurisdictions. Do we have policies in place that identify law enforcement from the common populace? Why do I ask that question? I spoke with our police chief here in Tennessee. I was like, hey, what's your response to active shooter? And we said I have conversations like, look, one of the things that we do is ensure that all of our law enforcement, if they're responding to an event and they're going to be on the scene in the public eye, they're going to wear something reflective front and back that identifies them as police, sheriff, whatever it may be, so that when people see them outside at night with a flashlight looking through bushes, They don't automatically believe that's the perpetrator. They understand, oh, that's a law enforcement officer. I can see that. Because if we say there's an active threat in the area, please shelter in place, be on the lookout for a single white male with a handgun, and then all of a sudden we inundate the area with plainclothes officers, maybe they're captains, investigations, etc., in the area with handguns and flashlights, the call volume will spike immediately. And so how can we do that? One, it keeps our officers safer, but also it helps us reduce that workload. So at this point, the suspect has committed suicide, and the call volume continues to not only increase, but it continues to grow and expand outside of that area. Now, the comm center sees all these calls for service coming in. We have no idea what's relevant and no idea what's not. Which one of these calls is going to give me information that's relevant to the apprehension of this suspect? We don't know. We don't know until we answer that call for service. So let me go back and start with this real quick. That leads us to say, how can we actually handle the call volume? So this is the typical spike that we see into comm centers following an active assailant, anywhere between 17 and 22,000% increase in the first hour. There is no staffing plan anywhere in the world that I've ever seen that can handle a momentary or hour-long spike of 22,500%. What do you do? And the answer is typically the best you can. And then most of the time, this is how they go into a queue. That queue is going to fill very quickly, and then it's going to get shunted to adjoining jurisdictions. And if they don't know what's going on, if they don't realize the impacts that your community is facing in that moment, there is no way for them to say, "Well, let me take that information for you. I'll make sure it gets back to that correct ECC." They may try to transfer it back, goes back in the queue. And then we have people on the news like, "Hey, I was on hold with 911 for 4 minutes or 10 minutes." Actually, you might have been in queue or you might have been bouncing around, and we see that quite often. Miss routes, we've seen an average between 6 and 9 minutes for a miss route to be actually routed to the correct jurisdiction once a location's been known to exist. And that's a delay in their response. But again, we don't know which one of this call volume here, this 22,000% increase, is going to yield information. So in this 5-hour window, they did 1,500 911 calls. And their typical baseline for the same 5-hour window is 46. That's pretty crazy. All right. 3 key takeaways. Human-initiated calls meant to deliver instant relevant information. Keep harping on that. We know this. We've known this for 50 years of 911. Just because a human saw something doesn't mean they're able to articulate the truth of that event in a telephone call. Okay? It happens. Secondly, multiple times, responding units drive directly into the path of the suspect. That's tough for us because we know that we're sending officers into an area that we don't have a lot of information about, the location of the person, the suspect, and we send them in like we think they're on the second floor. Lee and I were just talking about this earlier, like how do we actually approach that person the correct, like what's the vertical I need to understand that process? That information is not forthcoming when it's typically a person involved in that process. They're like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. I just hear gunshots. And trying to figure out where that's at, very difficult for us. And third is nobody can handle that call volume. And the last one I'll talk about is one that's a little more recent, that's had a lot of coverage, the East Palestine train derailment. And we're going to talk about some hard lessons that we've learned here. If you're not aware, we had a train derailment in East Palestine with Norfolk Southern. The train derailed at night in the dark. It was 8:12 p.m. The actual train was on fire 20 miles before East Palestine. By the time it got to East Palestine, it actually rolled over and caught fire. By 10 o'clock that night, shelter in place was issued for surrounding areas. Evacuation orders issued for the first mile around the event, which is a pretty significant outcome. The next day, the fire continues to burn. The third day, which would be day 1's incident, day 2, day 3, EPA officials confirmed vinyl chlorides on board. Firefighters were instructed to step back from the scene. A little late. Okay. And by February 6th at 4:30, we performed the control release of that information to try to get the toxic chemicals off board. What I want you to highlight here is on the right-hand side. We get so much information as telecommunicators into our ear from folks calling 911 or responders on the scene on the radio, or we see information coming through on a platform. The information that flowed out to responders, both for initial dispatch and for surrounding jurisdictions for mutual aid, is fire other 973 East Taggart Street, McKim's, East Palestine, train on fire near Alice, which is across street. McKim's is a store there. This is typically how we've been sharing information with responders on critical incidents because this works. This works for 99.59s of all incidents. But when the major event happens that changes your community, this is not enough. So how can we have that process? I'm going to show you and see if I can show you this quick video. The incident scene is incredibly complex. And we can tell from this, like, oh my gosh, it's a pretty substantial derailment. But if you're arriving here at night and everything is on fire, then how do you approach this? How do you know what's actually going on in this event? Now, I'll also play for you. I'm going to pause this and play for you. And if somebody in the chat can let me know if audio comes through, please. The actual dispatch. So 60-second audio.
Ellsworth Station 400, Milton 500, Jackson 600, Great Beach 800, Bowen Fire, all call, Springfield Fire, all call, Lowville Fire, New Middletown Fire. You're being requested mutual aid to East Palestine at 1020 East Taggart Street, 1020 East Taggart Street at Leak Oil. They're requesting any manpower for a train derailment. I'll have a gas station on fire. 1020 East Taggart Street. All companies, your timeout mutual aid for any manpower at 2241.
Pretty common, right? Pretty common for us to dispatch something along those lines. We have a very set of protocols that we use for the information that we're going to be sharing on the radio. Clear, concise communication, right? Accuracy, brevity, clarity, those type of things that we've been drilled into for years. My question is, based upon this information, what I'm responding to is a gas station fire, right? We just didn't understand what was going on in that process. No fault of responders who showed up on the scene and they're faced with literally the gates of hell. And I'm going to show you that video here shortly. And they start asking for mutual aid. You in the comm center are faced with, okay, what do you need? Well, let's start with manpower. Well, we're going to need a lot more than manpower. How do we shorten that time to get relevant, critical information into the hands of not only the telecommunicator, but also the field responders on the scene? So, light real quick. Key takeaways. Now, I'm going to play this because I thought it was just more powerful. This is the fire chief from East Palestine. Okay, and you'll hear his voice in the background. This was an interview he did with International Association of Fire Chiefs at one of their conferences in Florida here about a month and a half ago.
Having that information at my fingertips from the time of dispatch, we could have better placed apparatus, we could have held apparatus back, we could have better protected our firefighters, both from my department and all the departments coming in. We could have better protected our citizens, we could have issued the evacuation order quicker. We would have known what we were facing in front of us instead of having to wait almost an hour to find that information. We wouldn't have put the first responders in as much danger as we did at first. Not knowing, just knowing that we had a train on fire and a train derailed, we were very aggressive. We went back to what we know, what we train on, old school firefighting tactics. Having that knowledge of what was on that train and what we were facing, we could have taken a little less aggressive approach to dealing with that, staged equipment out, set down recon teams, subjected less people to that area, and most importantly, we could have got the citizens out of that area quicker.
We reverted back to what we know and how we trained. Right, so full circle. How do we impact our common everyday workflows to ensure that they're scalable for when incidents go absolutely ballistic? I can't think of a more difficult scenario for telecommunicators than a natural disaster the size of a hurricane, or an active assailant in a community that may be a single or multiple location event, or a train derailment that takes multiple days to actually extinguish and pushes people out of their homes. So now for how we apply these things. There is a heavy burden. There is a heavy burden on public safety partners, the ones that you work with every single day and you contract with to provide you software and solutions, to ensure that we are doing everything adequately we can to understand your workflows and build solutions to make those workflows better. But additionally, to understand the changing environments and dynamics that you're faced with every single day, whether you're East Palestine and you've got 15,000 people, or you're in Lee County, Florida, and you've got well over 100,000 people. The outcomes of those, there have to be some similarities there, right? There have to be some places that we can make effective change, and we're going to share a couple of those. So this is what we have learned by, one, hiring people from the industry, from public safety who understand this, and two, interacting with you on a regular basis to understand the workflows and how to make them better, and three, having 10 years and $250 million in innovation. So first things first, I know many of you on here have already seen Axon body cam locations already inside Rapid SOS portal, and that has been a game changer for us. We talked about the active assailant event, to where you're sending officers into a location where there's an active assailant. Once they leave their vehicles, AVL doesn't really assist you anymore. And I'm gonna highlight. There's a friend of mine that's here in this class, and they lost an officer at just a random traffic stop one morning, and it was hours before they found him again. And just being able to have the location of a body camera, the location of the person, not the vehicle, would have saved a lot of stress, and I'm sure a lot of long-term PTSD issues for people. Person locations is a changing paradigm in public safety. We see it with Axon here, embedded in Rapid SOS portal. We also see it with I Am Responding and their applications as well, apparatus and people. Understanding that complexity is really important. But it doesn't really matter unless we can see it contextual to that incident. And so this is Rapid SOS Premium inside of one of our local jurisdictions here in Tennessee. And what I will show you is that we were doing testing of Axon body locations with calls for service coming from a school with an indoor map. And I'm just going to pause it for a moment and say, wow, when I saw this, man, it was like, for us telecommunicator, my mindset was like, holy cow, I can tell the person texting 911's coming from this classroom, and I know the best path is to go in through the cafeteria. Now, for the majority of response for active assailants, law enforcement, either we stack up 4 persons, we make entry, we clear room by room. If the threat's not active, once the threat goes active, we move to the threat, mitigate the circumstance, right? That's incredible. But if our Knox box for that building is only on the front door, how many rooms are we clearing coming in the front door? Which hallway do we choose? Which one do we go to? Like, we have to split, or do we stay in the diamond formation? We talked about earlier. I think it was our friends. I can't remember who was it earlier talking about diamond formations, but like, how do we approach this? But if I know the location of the caller or texter, and I know which room they're standing in with an indoor map, and I know my officer's location at time of incident, that's incredible. But there's actually more that we can do here as well. So we've rolled out active assailant as available for every single Rapid SOS portal user in the United States. We felt like it was such a significant change that we wanted to make sure that every telecommunicator had access to it. What is active assailant? Working with our partners like Rapid Technologies and others who have different solutions for school safety, working with them that if a teacher presses a button or activates the app for an active assailant or some button on the wall inside of a school, that immediately flows into the comm center. It's a different color, it's a different tone. It highlights the information about that particular school, who hit the button, location inside the building, if there's indoor mapping, plotting that on the indoor map as well. All at the time of incident, not the time of call. And I think about our process for measuring success in public safety for the last 20 years has been, well, the phone rings, we start a clock, right? The phone rings, and we have X number of seconds to answer that call for service. And then we figure out how much longer do we have to dispatch that call. And that's success. But before that phone rings, there is an enormous amount of information, enormous amount of data, an enormous amount of suffering that's occurring before we get the call. If we can provide you context relevant information before that phone rings about that incident, when the phone rings, you're validating with a human what you already know because the incident has told you that. If your mind is being a little bit blown right now, welcome to Rapid SOS, because we're going to keep going. Secondly is train derailments. We took what we learned in aspect of like active assailants, like, hey, this is very similar to a train derailment. It's how do we get information from the scene that's relevant to that incident into the hands of responders to make that response function better and safer. And so for train derailments in Norfolk Southern, here we go. You'll get immediate notification of a train derailment from the Norfolk Southern NOC. You will immediately get to the exact location of the train derailment. Pretty important, right? Additionally, you'll get the contextual information about the physical components of that train, how many locomotives, how many cars, length of the train, etc. Third, you'll also get the train consists, and that's a new term probably in public safety that we don't hear in the ECC very often. It just literally means the contents of each rail car. If that content in that rail car is hazardous, it will identify those hazardous materials up top by rail car in order from the locomotive to the caboose, if there is a caboose. And you can click on each one of those and it will tell you car 23, there's the actual number on the side of the car, petroleum crude oil, ERG guide 113. You click on that, it takes you to the ERG and it tells you how to actually respond to that incident at time of incident. We're not waiting 3-4 days to figure out, well, we need the fire to be extinguished and we need sunlight or some type of lighting to try to read something on the side of a charred car to understand what's inside this platform. That video of those officers opening the back door of Kim's and walking into basically 5 to 7 inches of some liquid material to put out a fire for a train derailment is terrifying. What are you standing in? No clue. No clue. All right. But nobody responds to these incidents alone. Check my time. Yeah. Nobody responds to these incidents alone. So for active assailant and for Norfolk Southern train derailments, we're going to allow you in the comm center to select all the agencies around you to automatically notify them in Rapid SOS portal as well of the incidents that you're handling at that moment. And this works for if you have an active assailant, you can say, I want to notify everybody within 30 miles of me that we are working an active assailant. Because when the call volume starts coming in and it starts rolling to different jurisdictions, the last thing you want them to do is to try to shunt that back to you and put them back into a queue. Yes, we see they have an active assailant. Do you have any relevant information? Also, we'll call them on your city. We'll call them on the radio, whatever it may be, relay that relevant information. Because again, right, 22,000% spike increase in call volume. Which one of those calls is relevant? Probably 1 out of every 100, maybe. So how do we contextualize that information? Train derailments, same thing. You can select anybody within that 30-mile radius of your border and automatically notify them of a train derailment in your jurisdiction. You get to pick and choose who that is. That comes with training, policies, procedures, and hopefully exercises, maybe some learnings that you can take away from that as well. That's game-changing because if you have all this call volume coming in, your response is going outbound, they get on scene and they're going to ask for mutual aid. Who has the time to make the mutual aid request? It's going to fall back on us in Telecommunicator, right? We're making the mutual aid request by joining jurisdictions trying to find that asset. But if we're still trying to fill calls coming in from the public, how do we do that? But that's not enough. Having information about train derailment, having information about the consists of that train, having information about the hazardous materials, having information about the ERG is fantastic for the telecommunicator. But we want to make sure it also flows into the hands of first responders. Okay, the folks in the field who are actually doing the asset allocation. So, with I Am Responding, it's an app that we use, I think it's 12 or 13,000 departments in the United States using I Am Responding today. All that information at time of incident is also assigned to them as a pre-alert, saying, hey, train derailment, here's all the information. So before the tones drop, before you as a telecommunicator can dispatch a call for service, they know what's on that train. They know where it's at on the train itself, which cars have hazardous materials, which ones don't, and they can adjust their response and or evacuation before they put their boots on. And to make a public safety joke, before they get out of the recliner. Right? Now, all joking aside, that's incredible. Folks, I can't harp on enough that we've always had data in public safety. Always have. It has been analog, auditory. We've listened to it. We've interrogated the caller, trying to find some snippet of information to make this a better response. And now we're giving it to you before the human has the senses and says, I should call 911. What's going on? Well, I don't know, but there's a lot of fire down here, and I think it's the gas station. This is it's such a leap forward in public safety. Additionally, if you're not using I Am Responding, we'll provide a way for you to automatically text us outbound to any of your response jurisdictions, like the chief, lieutenants, captains, whoever you want to send it to, automatically. The same for your surrounding jurisdictions. Right, so we know that trained derailments, we don't respond alone. They're typically a very involved process and a very heightened level of a danger for the responders and the community both. So great focus on that. We are incredibly excited about our partnership with Norfolk Southern, and there's more to come. Public safety training and support does us no good to send this information to you, make changes that affect your workflow without providing you support. Part of that is, if you don't know, please go back and check our SOS portal. Up top right-hand corner, 3 little icons, 3 little lines. I call it the hamburger icon. It looks like a hamburger. Click that little hamburger icon. It'll say training. Click that. You'll have access to every piece of training about every data partner we have, workflows, Rapid SOS 101, all that information. Now, I'm saying all this, and you need to understand that everything that we have discussed today, with the exception of indoor mapping, is completely free at no cost to you in the ECC. Right? That's why I love this company. It's the mission, it's the mindset. But why did we do it? Because we believe. Not a core value on the wall, not a mission statement, not a pretty prose that we put together. We believe in every fiber of our being that we have a responsibility to make this industry better for every telecommunicator, every field responder, and everybody that we interact with. But every one of those calls for service typically start in the fingertips of the telecommunicator. And we want to make sure that we're providing deep impacts for folks in their worst possible moments for their communities, but also in every call along the way. Now, I'm happy to have other conversations. I appreciate Ricardo and Dare to Be Great here this time. We love having these moments to be able to share things with you. We try to make it not about a sales pitch because we're not selling anything, but we are making it about how do we improve things for you? So if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, feedback, my information is right here. That's my cell phone number. You can text me. I'll give you my email address. It's jpvhouse@rapidsos.com, all common spelling. But we're just getting started. Now, I cannot wait for what we're going to share with you at Dare to Be Great 6. Because again, it's going to be a paradigm shift. All right. Thank you for your time today. Any questions in the comments in the section? Leah, do you want to step back up on the stage and maybe I can relinquish control of this PowerPoint presentation real quick?
No questions for me, but thank you. That was great.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Good seeing you again, girl. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.